You want to know a super easy way to create business card mockups like these? Then keep watching. What's up designers, Matt Roberts here, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to create a business card mockup the easy way. Using mockups in client presentations is essential. It allows the client to visualize the design in a real world context, bringing your designs to life. There are thousands of resources online where you can download free and premium mockups from, but sometimes they're just not quite right. So today I'm going to share with you a super easy way to create a business card mockup that's fully customizable to suit your needs. Before we get started, smash that subscribe button. We post new videos every Wednesday, helping you become a better designer. Let's get started. So here are a couple of examples of the kind of thing that we're going to end up with at the end of this tutorial. So we've got the basic option and then something that's a little bit more advanced, but it's using the same techniques, we're just developing it slightly further. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is get our canvas set up. I've just got a 1920 by 1920 pixel canvas here, and the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put in a couple of rectangles. Because of the standard business card size is 85mm by 55mm, that's the size that I'm going to put in here. Just so that way that it actually works with my artwork that I've already created rather than having to re-alter things. But you can do this technique even without the artwork pre-existing. So we're going to create a couple of rectangles because my business card is going to be two-sided. So I'm just going to duplicate that using Command and J. And then there we've got our two front and back of the business card. So at this point, you can either decide to make it into smart objects so you can actually add artwork and then further utilize the design, or you can actually design straight onto these and then we'll actually manipulate them into the mock-up from there. I'm actually going to convert them into smart objects, that way I can use it going forward and actually reuse the document. So to do that, I'm going to right click on each of these and convert to smart object. Once I've done that, I'm just going to quickly rename each of these. Right, so now we've got them as smart object. This allows us to actually edit them and add stuff to them, and it keeps all of the transformations that we're going to eventually add to each of these. Double click on each of these and add in my artwork. So I've already got some artwork that I've created here. So I'm just going to scale those up to make sure that they fit nicely, and then I'm just going to hit save on that one, and save just applies it to the smart object layer. And now if I go back to the original document, you can see that that has replaced what I've just put in there. So we're just going to repeat that process on the second side of the business card. I'm just going to scale that back up again, and then I'm going to save that one. So using Command and S is a shortcut, or you could just go to File and Save. Let's close that off, and then as you can see, we've got the front and back side of the business card. I'm just going to rearrange these, so I've got the back at the top and then the front at the bottom, just because it's the way that I want to position my artwork in the document. So next thing we're going to want to do is actually add some depth and shadows to each of these to make them seem a little bit more realistic. So what I like to do is, if we right click on each of them, go to blending options, there's two ways. You can either use bevel and emboss, and using a very slight bevel, we can add just a little bit of depth to the edge here. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's just to make it seem 3D rather than being quite 2D and flat. The other way that we could do it is using the inner glow, and that does a very similar thing, but I'm just going to stick with the bevel emboss because it's just the way I like to do it. And then I'm just going to repeat that process for the other side. You may need to tweak these slightly to add your texture in there. Also, another reason why I like to use a bevel emboss is because of the angle that you can use to actually shade your artwork, whereas the inner glow, you're quite restricted. Let me just demonstrate that for you now. So let me just make this really obvious. So I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see. But using this angle option here, we can actually add the shading to different sides of the card depending on how we're actually going to position them. So depending on where we end up positioning the final result, we can actually alter this to actually suit the artwork a little bit better. So I'm just going to put that back to where I had it, or somewhere close for now, and then I can fine tune it in a little bit. So now we've got the shading added to both of those, we're going to want to arrange them. So in my first example, we just got them slightly skewed so that we can add a little bit of movement to them so they're not just quite flat. So depending, if you wanted to show them flat on the screen or to flat on a surface, you could actually add a drop shadow to each of these so they look like they're sat on something. To do that, we'd right click, go to blending options, and then add in a drop shadow. And then we can just tweak the drop shadow to suit how it'd actually look on that surface. So if we wanted to go with them flat, that's how we could leave it. But like I said, I want to add a little bit of motion to mine. So what I'm going to do is turn that off, and then I'm just going to rotate each of these slightly just so we can create almost like they're tumbling. And I'm just going to align each of these. So now we've got the front and back of the business cards. We just need to toy about with the positioning to make sure that we're happy with what we've got. So I'm just going to play around a little bit more to make sure I'm happy, and then tweak some of the effects to suit the positioning that I'm putting them in. Cool, now we've got the artwork to somewhere we're happy with. It's time to add some highlights and shadows to make them seem a little bit more realistic. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. The first way I'm not a fan of, but it's an option nonetheless. So if we come into the blending options again, we can add a drop shadow. But the reason I don't like this way is because of all of these artifacts it adds around here, which wouldn't be natural. So I'm just focusing on creating a shadow that sits over the top of this bottom card here. So I'm just going to turn that off. And to do that, what I'm going to do is duplicate the card layer that we've got. Once I've got that, I'm going to add a color overlay of black. And then I'm just going to rasterize all of the layer styles. So that just means we've got a black rectangle. I'm going to drop that below our artwork layer, and then I'm just going to position it to where I want the shadow to fall. Somewhere around there. Once I've positioned that to somewhere that I'm happy with, we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then we're just going to play around to find somewhere that we're happy with as to how the shadow will fall, and then hit OK. Now we've done that, you can see there's this part of the shadow here that we don't want, and to do that I'm going to command and click on the bottom layer because that's where I want to mask it off to, and then I'm just going to hit on the mask options here, and then that will mask out all of the artifacts that we don't want. Once we've done that, you can see it lines up quite nicely with the edge of this card, but it's still quite harsh. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower the opacity of this to somewhere that's more believable, just to add a bit of distance between the two. What I'm going to do for this second one, I want to make the cards seem like they're tumbling towards the surface rather than actually being on a surface. So I'm going to use an ellipse to create a shadow that's a little bit away so they are off the surface. Make sure that it's filled with black, and then once we've got that, I'm going to do the same thing I've just done with the other shadow. I'm going to go to Filter, and then I'm just going to apply the same effect again. And as you can see, that's done that. That's possibly a little harsh, so maybe just dial it down a little bit. So we'll go to Blur, Gaussian Blur, hit Smart Object, and then I'm just going to soften that off somewhere around there. And again, it's quite a harsh shadow, so I'm just going to drop the opacity of that down slightly just to soften it off and make it seem a little bit more realistic. Once we've got all of our shadows added, what we can do is actually transform all of these using Command and T. Because we've got some smart filters on those, that error message will pop up, but once we apply the resize, all the filters will add again. So what I'm going to do is resize this just so it's a little bit smaller inside of my artboard. And then there we have it. We've got 2 business cards tumbling towards the surface. At this point, you can actually add background layers. You can add extra textures to the background. You can add some paper textures. You can add anything you want, because there's no backgrounds to any of these, so you can put in behind whatever you would like. Once you've got somewhere you're happy with, you can add some lowlights and highlights using a gradient overlay. So to do that, we're going to right click, blending options, and then gradient overlay. That just allows us to add a gradient on top. I'm actually just going to dim that right down just to actually create that tiny little bit of depth. And I'm just going to repeat that process on the other side as well. Perfect. So if that's not enough for you, what you can actually do, you can take this a step further, and we've kept these quite 2-dimensional, but what you can do is you can add a little bit of 3-dimension in there to create them tumbling in different ways and position them on units, tables, whatever you want really. And it's going as far as cool. So the fun doesn't end there. What we can actually do is add some 3-dimension to each of these to create a little bit more movement, a little bit more texture, and actually create something a bit more visually interesting. So to do that, I've used the skew feature to create these at this tumbling angle, so they're actually more on the skew. So to do that, we've gone to edit, transform, and then skew, and I've manipulated each of these points to actually make them seem like they're falling and they're tilted back. And that's using exactly the same card and exactly the same starting point that we've just gone through. But I've used this skew feature to manipulate them to actually create them looking like they're falling. So there we have it, a super easy way to create some business card mock-ups for your logo design presentations. Thanks for watching, designers. If you like this video, smash that subscribe button, give it a like, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you get notified every time we post a new video. Let us know in the comments below what your favourite mock-ups to use are. And before you leave, download your free texture pack, link in the description box below.